I stood at the altar, my hands trembling as I stared out at the wooden pews. The left side, my wife's family, was packed with smiling faces. The right side, my side, was completely empty. Not a single soul. My parents, my aunts, and even my best friend of 20 years. All of them chose my brother's engagement party over my wedding day. While I was saying my vows, they were raising champagne glasses across town. Later that night, my phone lit up with a cold message from my mother. "We need to talk. Now." But they had no idea that their cruel choice was about to trigger a chain of events that would leave my golden boy brother utterly humiliated and financially ruined. Begging for mercy he wouldn't get. "Thank you for being here. Grab a warm glass of water, sit down, and listen as I tell you the whole story." The silence in that church was something I will never forget. It wasn't a peaceful silence. It was a heavy, suffocating weight that pressed against my chest. The stained glass windows cast beautiful, colorful light across the polished oak floors, but all I could focus on was the stark division in the room. To my left, Grace's family sat closely together, their eyes filled with warmth, support, and a quiet pity that they tried hard to hide from me. To my right, there was just polished wood and empty cushions. 50 chairs. That's how many I had set up for my side. 50 chairs for the people who shared my blood, the people who had watched me grow up, the people I had always bent over backwards for. Every single one of them was vacant. The organ music swelled, signaling the beginning of the ceremony, but the sound felt hollow to me. My chest tightened. I adjusted my tie, feeling a bead of sweat roll down the back of my neck. I kept waiting for the heavy wooden doors at the back of the sanctuary to swing open. I kept waiting for my mother to rush in, apologizing for traffic. I kept waiting for my father to give me that familiar, stern nod from the front row. I kept waiting for Dylan, my supposed best man, to jog up the aisle and take his place beside me with a sheepish grin. But the doors remained shut. The only sound was the rustling of fabric from Grace's side of the aisle. When the ceremony finally ended, and Grace and I walked out of those doors as husband and wife, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, hoping against hope that it was an apology. Instead, there was a message from my mother, glaring on the bright screen. "We need to talk. Now. No congratulations. No, I love you." Just a cold, demanding text, as if I had somehow inconvenienced her on my own wedding day by existing. I looked at Grace, my beautiful wife, who was wiping a happy tear from her cheek, completely oblivious to the message I had just received. I forced a smile, slid the phone back into my pocket, and made a silent vow right then and there. I was done. I was done being the afterthought. I was done being the backup plan. To understand why they would do something so unbelievably cruel, I have to take you back 2 years, to the moment the rot in my family tree truly started to spread. Growing up, there was always a clear, unspoken hierarchy in our household. Elijah was the workhorse. My younger brother, Carter, was the show pony, and my parents, Robert and Mary, were the eager spectators who only clapped when the pony pranced. I am 32 now, a construction project manager. I built my life with calloused hands and a sore back. When I was 18, I didn't get a shiny new car or a fully funded ride to a prestigious university. My parents sat me down and explained that since I was sturdy and capable, I needed to figure out my own path. So I went to a local trade school. I started at the absolute bottom, hauling heavy bags of cement, pulling copper wire in sweltering attics, and breathing in drywall dust for minimum wage. Every dollar I made was soaked in sweat. I never complained. I thought that hard work was just what men did. I thought it would eventually earn my parents' respect. Carter, on the other hand, was born with a silver spoon that he somehow convinced my parents they owed him. He is 2 years younger than me, blessed with the kind of jawline and effortless charm that makes people forgive his glaring character flaws. Carter has never worked a legitimate, grueling day in his entire life. When I was working double shifts on construction sites, Carter was finding himself, through expensive photography courses my parents paid for, which he inevitably dropped after 3 weeks. But Carter had one very specific talent. He knew how to mold himself into exactly what wealthy women wanted. He was a professional parasite. Since high school, he bounced from one rich girlfriend to the next. He never looked for a job. He looked for a host. And the most sickening part was that my parents absolutely adored this about him. They called it networking. Whenever Carter brought home a woman whose father owned a dealership or whose family had generational wealth, my parents would roll out the red carpet. They would brag to their friends at the country club about the circles Carter was moving in, completely ignoring the fact that he was contributing absolutely nothing to society. I remember coming home exhausted one Friday night, my boots covered in mud, every muscle in my back screaming. I walked into the kitchen just as my dad was popping open a bottle of expensive wine. "Celebrate with us, Elijah," my dad said, a massive grin on his face. Carter's new girlfriend just took him on a ski trip to Aspen. All expenses paid. The girl's family is loaded. I stared at him, my work boots leaving dirty footprints on the linoleum. "Dad, he's 26. Doesn't he need to actually earn his own salary at some point?" My mother scoffed, waving her hand at me dismissively. "Oh, stop being so bitter, Elijah. Not everyone has to do manual labor like you. Carter works smart, not hard. He understands the value of relationships." Relationships, that was her polite word for gold digging. I swallowed my frustration, washed my hands at the sink, and went to my room. It was always like this. My tangible achievements, getting a promotion to site supervisor, finishing a massive commercial build under budget, were met with lukewarm nods. Carter simply existing in the presence of someone with money was treated like a Nobel Prize victory. They didn't respect hard work. They respected the illusion of status. And I was too busy working to provide that illusion. I met Grace during a late-night shift at the local hospital. My crew was doing a renovation on the East Wing, and she was an emergency room nurse. I saw her dealing with a chaotic waiting room. Calm, composed, and incredibly kind. We bonded over burnt vending machine coffee at 2 in the morning. Grace was exactly what I wasn't used to. She was genuine. She didn't care about the dirt under my fingernails. She cared about the man underneath the hard hat. We fell in love the slow, steady way. No expensive ski trips. No lavish gifts. Our dates consisted of homemade dinners and long walks in the park, talking about our dreams. We shared the same core values. We believed in earning what you have, paying your own way, and never relying on handouts. When I finally asked her to marry me, I did it in the living room of our tiny, cramped apartment, holding a modest ring that I had worked overtime for 6 months to afford. She cried, said yes, and held me like I was the most valuable thing in the world. We immediately sat down at our scratched kitchen table with a notebook and a calculator. We didn't have a massive college fund left over to dip into. Neither of our parents offered a dime to help with the wedding. Grace's parents were retired teachers living on a fixed income, and my parents were too busy funding Carter's lifestyle transitions to contribute. But we didn't care. We wanted to pay for it ourselves. "We can do this, Eli," Grace said, tapping her pen against the paper. "If we cut out eating at restaurants completely, and I pick up 2 extra on-call shifts a week, we can save up enough in 18 months. I'll take on weekend consulting for the residential side," I replied, squeezing her hand. "We'll build it together, just like everything else." And we did. For 18 grueling months, we squeezed every penny. We ate rice and beans. We skipped vacations. I worked 60-hour weeks, coming home so exhausted I could barely take off my boots before falling asleep on the couch. Grace worked back-to-back night shifts, her eyes heavy with dark circles, but she never stopped smiling. Slowly, agonizingly, the numbers in our joint savings account grew. 1,000, 5,000, 10,000. When we finally hit our goal of $18,000, we sat on the floor of our living room and cried tears of pure relief and pride. It wasn't enough for a massive, blowout extravaganza, but it was exactly what we wanted. A beautiful, intimate ceremony at an old stone church, followed by a warm reception with good food and real friends. We picked our date carefully, September 15th. We booked the church. We put down the non-refundable deposits for the caterer and the modest reception hall. In January, 8 full months before the wedding, we sent out beautiful handwritten, save-the-date cards to everyone in our families. When my parents received theirs, my mother called me. Not to congratulate me on finalizing the plans, but to complain about the postage stamp. September 15th, she sighed over the phone. That's right in the middle of the transition to autumn weather, Elijah. I hope the heating in that old church of yours works. Carter gets chills so easily. The heating works fine, Mom, I said, rubbing my temples. Are you guys coming or not? Of course we're coming. It's just a wedding. Put us down for the chicken. She hung up. No excitement. No joy. Just a begrudging acceptance of a minor inconvenience. But at least they were coming. Or so I thought. We had our date. We had our money. We were ready to start our lives. Just as Grace and I were getting deep into the stressful details of seating charts and floral arrangements, Carter hit the motherlode. He brought home Victoria. Victoria was 38, 8 years older than Carter, and she was a force of nature. She was a high-level executive at a major tech firm downtown. She drove a brand-new Porsche Cayenne, wore suits that cost more than my monthly rent, and carried an aura of absolute authority. She was intimidating, sharp-tongued, and clearly accustomed to giving orders and having them instantly obeyed. Why a woman like that wanted a guy like my brother, I will never fully understand. Maybe she liked having a handsome piece of arm candy who didn't threaten her career. Maybe Carter's subservient, eager-to-please attitude stroked her ego. Whatever the reason, she was thoroughly hooked, and my parents were absolutely losing their minds with joy. The first time Carter brought her to Sunday dinner, it was nauseating to watch. My mother, who usually served dry pot roast on chipped plates, had spent 2 days cooking a gourmet rack of lamb and brought out the fine china she hadn't touched since the 90s. Victoria, dear, Carter tells us you just got a massive promotion as senior vice president. My mother cooed, pouring her a glass of wine that cost more than my weekly grocery budget. We are just so proud of the circles he's running in. He always had an eye for quality. Victoria offered a tight, practiced smile. Carter is very attentive. He makes sure I'm relaxed when I get home from the office. My dad puffed out his chest. That's my boy, supporting the business world. I looked across the table at Grace, who was quietly eating her salad, completely ignored by everyone. I felt a surge of protective anger. I was managing multi-million-dollar construction sites, making sure buildings didn't collapse on people, but Carter was deemed a success because he poured wine and gave back rubs to a CEO. Within months, Carter's Instagram feed turned into a disgusting display of unearned luxury. He was constantly posting photos of himself lounging on the deck of Victoria's yacht, wearing a $10,000 Rolex she had clearly bought for him. His captions were always the same pseudo-inspirational garbage. Building an empire takes time. Surrounding yourself with success is step 1. #grind, #blessed. The guy literally woke up at noon on a Tuesday and called it a grind. Whenever our family got together, Victoria's name dominated every conversation. It was never about my upcoming wedding. It was never about Grace's heroic shifts at the hospital. It was always, Victoria is thinking of buying a summer home in the Hamptons, or Victoria's stock options are vesting next month. Carter strutted around like he was the one earning the money, dictating family plans and acting incredibly arrogant. He was riding her coattails, and my parents were right there behind him, hanging on for dear life, hoping some of that wealth would trickle down to them. They were so blinded by the glare of Victoria's credit card that they couldn't see the monster they were feeding. And they certainly couldn't see the massive storm that was about to hit my life. It happened in July, exactly 2 months before my wedding. My parents invited the whole family over for a special barbecue. Grace and I were exhausted from work, but we dragged ourselves over, expecting a standard afternoon of being ignored while Carter bragged. Instead, Carter stood up at the patio table, clinked his glass with a fork, and pulled Victoria up next to him. She was wearing a diamond ring the size of a marble. "We're getting married," Carter announced, flashing his perfect, blinding smile. My parents erupted. My mother actually screamed, jumping up to hug Victoria like she had just won the lottery. My dad was clapping Carter on the back, his face red with excitement. Grace and I smiled politely, offering our congratulations. I didn't care that he was getting married. Let him be someone else's financial burden. But then, Carter raised his hands to quiet everyone down. And because Victoria has such a demanding schedule, and we want to celebrate with all of her important clients and executives before the big corporate retreat in October, we've decided to throw a massive engagement party to kick things off. Oh, wonderful, my mother gushed. When is it? Carter looked right at me. He didn't blink. He didn't hesitate. September 15th. The air left my lungs. The smile froze on Grace's face. Wait, I said, my voice cutting through the cheering. September 15th? Carter, that's my wedding day. You know that. We sent the save the dates out in January. Carter just shrugged, a casual, dismissive movement of his shoulders. Oh man, is it? I guess I didn't even realize there was a problem with that date. It totally slipped my mind. It was a lie. A blatant, obvious lie. Our wedding invitation was literally pinned to the corkboard in my parents' kitchen, not 10 feet away from where he was standing. You can't do that, I said, my voice rising, the anger starting to boil over. We have non-refundable deposits. We've been planning this for over a year. Victoria sighed, looking at me like I was a stubborn child interrupting a boardroom meeting. Elijah, be reasonable. My parents are flying in from Europe. The caterer I want is only available that weekend. It's literally the only weekend that works for the people who actually matter. The people who actually matter. The words hung in the air like toxic smoke. I looked at my parents, expecting them to step in. Expecting them to say, Carter, you have to pick another date. That's your brother's wedding. Instead, my mother looked at me with an annoyed frown. Elijah, don't make a scene. It's just an engagement party, but it's very important for Victoria's networking. I'm sure we can figure something out. Figure what out, Mom? I snapped, my hands curling into fists. I am getting married on September 15th. You are either at my wedding or you are at his party. There is no figuring it out. Carter rolled his eyes. God, Eli, you're always so dramatic. Just move your little church thing back a week. It's not like you guys are throwing the event of the century. I grabbed Grace's hand. She was shaking slightly, her eyes wide with shock. I didn't say another word to him. I didn't look at my parents. I just turned around and walked out of that house. I thought it was just Carter being his usual selfish self. I thought my parents would eventually come to their senses. I was wrong. I was so terribly wrong. The cruelty wasn't an accident. It was a choice. For 3 agonizing weeks, Grace and I lived in a state of suspended animation. We kept telling ourselves that family wouldn't actually do this. They wouldn't actually force a choice between a wedding we had saved for over a year and a spontaneous, flashy engagement party. Then my phone rang on a Tuesday night. It was my dad. I answered it, hoping he was calling to tell me Carter had changed his date. Hey, Dad. Elijah, listen to me. His voice was deep, authoritative, the tone he used when he expected absolute obedience. We need to have a serious conversation about September 15th. There's nothing to talk about, I said firmly, pacing my small living room while Grace watched me nervously from the sofa. My wedding is on the 15th. Carter needs to move his party. My dad let out a heavy, exasperated sigh. Son, you need to look at the bigger picture here. Carter's engagement party isn't just a party. It's a high-level networking event. Victoria is inviting CEOs, tech investors, people who can set Carter up for life. This is fundamentally about his future financial security and social standing. I stopped pacing. My grip on the phone tightened so hard my knuckles turned white. And my wedding isn't about my future? My marriage to Grace doesn't matter. You and Grace are already established, he reasoned, his voice dripping with twisted logic. You have your construction job. She has the hospital. You're stable. Carter needs this opportunity. He needs to impress these people so he can secure his position with Victoria. You're a smart boy, Elijah. You can just call the church and push your date back to November. It's a small change for you, but it's a massive win for your brother. I am not losing $18,000 in deposits so Carter can drink champagne with tech bros. Dad, are you actually asking me to ruin my wedding for his party? I am asking you to be a good brother. My dad barked, his temper flaring. I am asking you to stop being so selfish and think about the family for once. Victoria is offering us a level of security we've never had. Do you want to ruin that because you're too stubborn to make a phone call? My chest heaved. The sheer audacity, the absolute lack of respect for my life, my money, and my future wife was suffocating. Dad, I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, if you choose his party over my wedding, you are dead to me. I mean it. There was a long, terrible silence on the line. I could hear his breathing. I waited for him to back down. I waited for him to remember that I was his blood, his firstborn son. Carter needs us, Elijah, he said coldly. And if you're going to act like a petulant child, then maybe it's best we give you some space. He hung up. I slowly lowered the phone. Grace walked over and wrapped her arms around my waist, pressing her face against my chest. I didn't cry. I was too angry to cry. My father had just explicitly confirmed what I had suspected my entire life. I was disposable. The days following that phone call were a masterclass in psychological torture. We had sent out 75 invitations in total. 50 to my side of the family, 25 to Grace's. Our mailbox, which should have been a source of daily joy, became an instrument of daily humiliation. Grace's RSVPs came back quickly, filled with enthusiastic checks in the joyfully accepts box and little handwritten notes of congratulations. My side? Silence. Then, exactly 1 month before the wedding, the dam broke. But it wasn't a flood of acceptances. It was a coordinated, systematic wave of rejections. I opened the first envelope. It was from my Aunt Susan, my father's sister. Declines with regret. No note. No explanation. The next day, 2 more. My Uncle David and my cousin Sarah. Declines. I started calling them. I needed to know if my father had actually poisoned the entire family against me. I called my Aunt Susan first. She answered on the 3rd ring, her voice tight and uncomfortable. Elijah. Hi, sweetheart. Aunt Susan, I got your RSVP. You're really not coming. Oh, Eli, I'm so sorry, she stammered, clearly reading from a mental script. We're still trying to figure out our schedule situation. The 15th is just so complicated right now. Complicated how? You've known about this date since January. Well, your parents called and Carter is throwing that big event. And your mother mentioned how important it is for the families standing to have a united front for Victoria's people. Her voice trailed off. So you're choosing a party over my wedding, I stated, the reality settling like lead in my stomach. It's not like that, Eli. We love you, it's just, your parents made some very strong points about Carter's future. I hung up. Over the next week, the pattern repeated itself with sickening consistency. My grandparents, my cousins, everyone, they all sent polite declines, and when pressed, they all gave the same vague, cowardly excuses. My parents had effectively lobbied the entire extended family, convincing them that attending my wedding was an insult to Victoria and, by extension, a threat to the family's proximity to wealth. They had reduced the most important day of my life to a scheduling conflict, and they all chose the option that came with free caviar and the illusion of high society. Every night, Grace would sit at the kitchen table, crossing names off our master list with a red pen. Her hand would shake slightly every time she drew a line through one of my relatives. I felt a profound, burning shame. I felt like a failure as a man, unable to even command the basic respect of my own bloodline. I was being entirely erased from my own family, replaced by the shiny new toy my brother had brought home. But I still had Dylan, or so I thought. Dylan and I had been best friends since we were 8 years old. We played Little League together, got our first beers together, and suffered through the same brutal trade school classes. He was the guy who helped me move my ratty furniture into my first apartment. When I asked him to be my best man, He had literally tackled me in a hug. He was the one piece of my past I was absolutely certain of. 2 days before the wedding. 48 hours. I was at the venue, double-checking the lighting setup when my phone rang. It was Dylan. I answered it with a smile, expecting him to ask about what time we were picking up the rented tuxedos. "Hey man," I said. "You ready for Saturday? I hope your speech doesn't roast me too hard." "Hey, Eli." His voice was incredibly quiet, raspy, not his usual loud, booming tone. "Listen, man. I need to talk to you about Saturday." My stomach dropped instantly. I recognized that tone. I had been hearing it from my relatives for a month. "Dylan, what is it?" "I don't think I can make it, man." The venue spun around me. I grabbed the edge of a table to steady myself. "What?" "Dylan, you're my best man. The wedding is in 2 days. What are you talking about?" "I'm so sorry, Eli," he mumbled, sounding like a cornered rat. "It's just, things got really complicated. Carter called me a few weeks ago." "Carter?" The name tasted like acid in my mouth. "Why the hell is Carter calling you?" He wanted to talk about Victoria's company," Dylan confessed, his voice breaking. "You know, I've been trying to get my landscaping business off the ground. Carter said Victoria's firm is looking for a new contractor for their massive corporate campus. He said if I came to the engagement party, he could personally introduce me to the facility directors. It's a 6-figure contract, Eli. It could change my whole life." Couldn't breathe. My best friend. My brother in every way that mattered. Carter hadn't just stolen my family. He had actively, maliciously reached out to the one person I had left and bought him off with a promise of a contract. "He manipulated you, Dylan?" I growled, my voice shaking with a rage so profound it scared me. "He is using you to hurt me. He doesn't care about your landscaping business." "He makes some valid points, man," Dylan argued defensively. "This could be huge for me financially. Your wedding will still be special with Grace's family there. I have to look out for my future." "Your future?" I repeated, the words tasting like ash. "You're selling out 20 years of friendship for a chance to kiss an executive's ass at a party. Don't be like that, Eli. Try to understand." "I understand perfectly," I interrupted, my voice turning dead cold. "Don't ever contact me again. Lose my number." I ended the call. I stood in the middle of the empty reception hall, surrounded by white linen tables and floral centerpieces, and I finally broke. I sank to the floor, put my head in my hands, and let the sheer, crushing weight of the betrayal wash over me. They had stripped me bare. They had taken everything. Saturday, September 15th arrived. The day that was supposed to be a celebration of love became a battlefield of the heart. I stood in the small groom's room at the back of the church, adjusting my tie in the mirror. My eyes were red. There was no Dylan behind me to crack a joke and calm my nerves. There was no father to pat my shoulder. I was entirely alone. There was a soft knock on the door. I turned around to see William, Grace's father. He was a quiet, gentle man, a retired history teacher who rarely raised his voice. He stepped into the room, looking at me with a mixture of immense kindness and deep sorrow. He knew everything. "Elijah," he said softly. "I'm ready, William," I said, trying to force a brave smile. He walked over to me, placed a warm, heavy hand on my shoulder, and looked me dead in the eye. "A man is not defined by the people who leave him behind. He is defined by the people he chooses to protect. You are a good man, and I am truly honored to call you my son." That broke the dam. A single tear escaped, tracing a hot path down my cheek. I nodded, unable to speak, and let him lead me out to the altar. The ceremony was beautiful, despite the glaring, painful emptiness of the right side of the aisle. When Grace walked down, radiating love and determination, all the pain momentarily vanished. We said our vows. We meant every single word. But during the reception, the ghost of my family haunted every corner. While I was dancing with my new wife, my phone buzzed in my jacket pocket. I shouldn't have looked. I knew I shouldn't have looked. but the psychological wound was too fresh. I couldn't stop picking at it. I went to the bathroom, locked myself in a stall, and opened Instagram. There it was, Carter's live feed. He was standing in a massive, glittering ballroom downtown. There were ice sculptures shaped like swans. Waiters in white gloves were walking around with trays of oysters. Victoria was wearing a designer dress that probably cost more than my entire wedding budget. And there, in the background, laughing and clinking champagne flutes, were my parents, my aunts, my cousins. Dylan was there, wearing a cheap suit, awkwardly trying to talk to a group of executives who were clearly ignoring him. They looked incredibly happy. They didn't look like people who were missing a wedding. They looked like they had won the lottery and were celebrating leaving the dead weight behind. I stared at the screen until the screen went dark. Then, a strange, profound calmness washed over me. The anger didn't disappear. It condensed. It hardened into something cold, sharp, and unbreakable. I walked out of the bathroom, washed my face in the sink, and looked at myself in the mirror. The Elijah who craved his parents' approval died in that bathroom. The Elijah who made excuses for his brother's parasitic behavior was gone. I walked back out to the reception hall, pulled Grace into my arms, and danced with her for the rest of the night. I didn't look at my phone again. I had cut the dead branches off my family tree. Now it was time to build my own empire. 3 months after the wedding, the universe threw the first stone in what would become an avalanche of karma. My grandpa Thomas passed away in his sleep. He was 89, so his passing wasn't a shock. Grandpa Thomas had always been a quiet, observant man. He sat in the corner during family gatherings, smoking his pipe, rarely saying much. My parents always assumed he was just old and out of touch. They completely underestimated him. The funeral was a tense affair. It was the first time I had seen my family since the wedding. My parents tried to act like nothing had happened, offering stiff hugs that I firmly rejected. Carter showed up in a custom Italian suit, Victoria on his arm, looking like he was attending a movie premiere rather than a burial. I stood with Grace and her family, keeping my distance. A week later, we were all summoned to a sleek lawyer's office downtown for the reading of the will. My parents were buzzing with excitement. Grandpa Thomas had owned a beautiful, fully paid-off craftsman home in a highly desirable neighborhood, and they were already whispering about how Carter could use it as a rental property to boost his portfolio. The lawyer, a stern man with wire-rimmed glasses, sat at the head of a long mahogany table. My family sat on one side, Grace and I on the other. Mr. Patterson was very specific in his final wishes. The lawyer began, shuffling his papers. He amended this document exactly 2 weeks after September 15th of this year. My heart did a strange flutter. 2 weeks after my wedding. The lawyer continued. To my son, Robert, and his wife, Mary, I leave my collection of antique fishing gear and the sum of $5,000. My parents' faces fell instantly. $5,000 was a slap in the face. To my grandson, Carter, the lawyer read, adjusting his glasses. I leave my personal library of classic literature, in the hopes he might read about men of actual substance, and a government savings bond in the amount of $2,500. Carter's jaw actually dropped. He let out a loud, incredulous scoff. What? That's it? $2,000? That's completely impossible. Grandpa loved me. The lawyer ignored him. And finally, to my grandson, Elijah, for demonstrating the quiet dignity and honest labor of our ancestors, and for understanding the true meaning of commitment, I leave my primary residence, fully paid. A collective gasp echoed in the room. Furthermore, the lawyer stated loudly, cutting over my mother's rising voice, I leave Elijah my entire vintage car collection, including the 3 fully restored Porsche 911s in the garage, and the entirety of my life insurance policy. The room erupted. My mother stood up, her face purple with rage. This is a mistake. That house is worth nearly $500,000. Those Porsches are museum quality. Carter needs that inheritance to match Victoria's assets. It is no mistake, ma'am, the lawyer said coldly. Mr. Patterson was of sound mind. He noted that those who show up for family when it matters deserve the fruits of the family's labor. Grandpa knew. He had sat in his chair, quietly watching my entire family abandon me, and he had delivered his own brand of justice from beyond the grave. Carter glared at me, his eyes full of venom. But I didn't care. I squeezed Grace's hand under the table. We had just been handed the keys to our future. Instead of sitting on the sudden windfall, I weaponized it. I didn't want to just be comfortable. I wanted to be untouchable. I immediately sold one of the vintage Porsches to a collector for $90,000. I used that cash, along with the life insurance policy, to quit my job and officially launch my own commercial construction consulting firm. Because I had no mortgage on the massive house Grandpa left me, I could afford to aggressively underbid older, slower firms. Within 6 months, my business was exploding. I was hiring crews, winning contracts, and pulling in money I had only ever dreamed of. While I was building a fortress, Carter was frantically digging his own grave. I still had one ally left in the family tree, my younger cousin, Chloe. She had been away at college during the wedding fiasco, but she despised my parents' toxic behavior. We met for coffee once a month, and she became my inside source on the slow-motion train wreck of Carter's life. "He is bleeding her dry, Eli," Chloe whispered during one of our meetings, looking around as if my mother might jump out of the bushes. "Victoria works 80 hours a week, and Carter is basically acting like a trust fund wife. He's putting everything on her black card." "Like what?" I asked, sipping my black coffee. "Everything. $500 dinners with influencer friends. A new wardrobe every month. He literally forced her to upgrade his car to a Range Rover because the Porsche didn't have enough trunk space for his golf clubs." Chloe rolled her eyes. "Aunt Mary thinks it's hilarious. But Victoria is looking exhausted." That information planted a seed in my mind. I started paying very close attention to Carter's public social media profiles. He was incredibly arrogant, documenting every single lavish expense to prove his worth to the world. Through my growing business network, I had become good friends with a guy named Nathan. Nathan was a forensic accountant who specialized in high-stakes divorce and custody battles. He tracked hidden assets for a living. One night over beers, I told him about my brother's spending habits. "If he's posting it publicly," Nathan said, a calculating gleam in his eye, "it's data. You can build a financial profile on anyone if they're dumb enough to brag about it online." So I started building. Every night, after Grace went to sleep, I sat in my home office with a massive Excel spreadsheet. Every time Carter posted a picture of a Tom Ford suit, I found the retail price and logged it. Every time he checked into a Michelin star restaurant, I estimated the bill and logged it. Every luxury vacation, every watch, every bottle of champagne. I was meticulously documenting a parasite feeding on its host. And then, Nathan called me with a piece of industry gossip that made all the puzzle pieces snap perfectly into place. "Eli," Nathan said over the phone, his voice hushed. "You know Victoria's tech firm? The one Carter is always bragging about." "Yeah, what about it?" "They just lost their biggest government contract. The board is panicking. Word on the street is they are preparing for a massive restructuring. Sweeping layoffs. Executives aren't safe." My blood ran cold, and then a slow, dangerous smile spread across my face. Carter had tied his entire existence, his entire ego, and his upcoming $130,000 wedding to Victoria's endless cash flow. He had alienated his own brother, destroyed my wedding day, and manipulated my best friend, all under the assumption that the money would never run out. The money was about to run out, and I was going to make absolutely sure that when the ship sank, Carter wouldn't have a life vest. The storm was coming, and I was holding the lightning rod. I spent the next 3 weeks operating like a ghost in my own home. Every evening, after Grace went to sleep, I retreated to my home office. I opened a blank Excel spreadsheet and started building the weapon that would dismantle my brother's entire life. Thanks to Nathan's tip about the impending layoffs at Victoria's tech firm, I knew the clock was ticking. Carter was completely oblivious. He was still posting daily updates on his Instagram, bragging about his luxurious life. To him, these photos were trophies. To me, they were financial evidence. I scrolled through his feed, logging every single lavish expense he had proudly flaunted over the past year. A $4,000 weekend trip to Napa Valley. A bespoke Italian suit that cost more than a used car. $600 dinners at exclusive downtown steakhouses occurring 3 times a week. I tracked the prices of the designer watches he wore, the high-end golf clubs he bought, and the daily luxury purchases he swiped on Victoria's credit card. When I finally hit the AutoSum button at the bottom of the spreadsheet, even I was shocked by the number glaring back at me. $165,000. Carter had burned through $165,000 of Victoria's money in a single year. He was draining her salary faster than she could earn it, all while contributing absolutely nothing. He was a financial parasite, and I was about to expose him to the one man who could crush him. Victoria's father, Arthur. Arthur was a self-made man from the old school of business. He built his wealth in manufacturing, out in the Midwest before moving his family to the coast. He valued hard work, and from what Chloe had told me, he had never fully trusted Carter. He just kept his mouth shut to keep his daughter happy. I knew that if Arthur saw the raw data, he wouldn't stay quiet anymore. I compiled the spreadsheet into a clean, professional PDF document. I attached screenshots of Carter's most arrogant Instagram posts as exhibits. I created a secure, anonymous email account. I didn't want this traced back to me. I wanted it to look like a concerned colleague or a financial auditor had stumbled upon a massive red flag. In the subject line, I typed, "Urgent financial liability regarding Carter." I attached the PDF, took a deep breath, and hit send. The email went straight to Arthur's private business address. I leaned back in my chair and watched the screen. The trap was set. Now I just had to wait for the dominoes to fall. The explosion happened exactly 1 week later. Victoria's company announced their restructuring on a Tuesday morning. It wasn't just a minor layoff. It was a bloodbath. Entire departments were eliminated. High-level executives were handed cardboard boxes and escorted out of the building by security. Victoria, who had based her entire identity and her massive budget on her corporate title, was one of them. Her massive 6-figure salary vanished into thin air. Her promised promotion was gone. Her stock options were frozen. According to Chloe, who heard the entire dramatic fallout from my hysterical mother later, Victoria drove home in a state of absolute shock. She walked into her massive, expensive house, completely devastated, looking for some comfort from the man she was about to marry. She found Carter lounging on the expensive Italian leather sofa, playing a video game. He didn't even look up when she walked in. He just complained that the housekeeper hadn't stocked his favorite sparkling water in the fridge, and then started whining about the floral arrangements for their upcoming wedding. He wanted white orchids imported from Hawaii, and the florist was pushing back on the price. Victoria looked at him, realizing for the first time that the man sitting in her living room wasn't a partner. He was a dependent. She was too terrified and ashamed to tell him she had lost her job. She just nodded numbly, went up to their bedroom, and cried. But she couldn't hide the truth from her father. The very next day, Victoria and Carter were scheduled to have a final, massive meeting with their wedding planner and vendors. They were supposed to write the final checks for the venue, the caterer, and the band, a total of $130,000. Before they could even leave the house, Arthur's black sedan pulled up the driveway. Arthur marched through the front door. He didn't knock. He didn't say hello. He walked straight into the dining room, where Victoria was sorting through wedding invitations, and slammed a thick manila folder onto the mahogany table. "Dad? What is this?" Victoria asked, startled by his red face and furious eyes. "That," Arthur growled, his voice echoing through the large house, "is a detailed record of exactly how your fiancé has been spending your money. Somebody sent it to my office. I had my own accountant verify the numbers this morning. It's all real." Victoria opened the folder. She saw the spreadsheet. She saw the screenshots of Carter bragging to the world about spending her money. She saw the staggering total of $165,000. At that exact moment, Carter strolled into the dining room, wearing a plush bathrobe, holding a cup of gourmet coffee. He smiled his usual arrogant smile. "Morning, Arthur," Carter said smoothly. "Are you here to help us finalize the vendor checks?" Arthur turned slowly to look at my brother. The disgust on his face was absolute. "I am here to stop my daughter from making the biggest mistake of her life." The tension in the room was thick enough to choke on. Carter's smile faltered, his eyes darting between Arthur's furious glare and Victoria's pale, trembling face. "Victoria," Carter said, forcing a chuckle. "What's going on? Why is your dad yelling?" Victoria slowly looked up from the folder. The illusion was completely shattered. "Carter, did you really spend $4,000 at a resort in Napa while I was in Chicago for that conference last month?" Carter stiffened. I told you I was networking. I was making connections for us. You bought a $2,000 bottle of wine for a table of strangers." Victoria read from the sheet, her voice cracking. "And you posted a picture of it saying you were funding the local economy." "Victoria, babe, you make plenty of money," Carter argued, stepping forward with his hands raised defensively. "You told me not to worry about the budget. You said my job was to manage our social standing." Victoria stood up. Her hands were shaking so hard she had to grip the edge of the table. "I don't make plenty of money anymore, Carter. I was fired yesterday. My department was completely eliminated." The words hung in the air. Carter froze. His brain simply could not process the information. "Fired?" he repeated, the color draining from his perfect face. "What do you mean, fired? What about the promotion? What about the bonuses?" "They're gone," she whispered, tears finally spilling over her cheeks. "I have nothing coming in. We have $50,000 in credit card debt because of this wedding. I was going to pay it off with my bonus, but now, Carter, I have no income. We have to postpone the wedding. We have to cancel the vendors today." This was the moment of truth. This was the moment a real man would step up, pull his crying fiancée into his arms, and say, "We will figure this out together. I will get a job. I will support you." But Carter wasn't a real man. He was a parasite, and the host had just run dry. Carter's face contorted into an ugly, selfish sneer. "Postpone the wedding? Are you out of your mind? Do you know how embarrassing that would be for me? I have friends flying in from the coast." Victoria stared at him, absolutely horrified. "Carter, I literally cannot pay for it. I don't have the money." "Well, then get another job immediately," Carter snapped, raising his voice, his true colors flying high for everyone to see. "Call your contacts. Pull some strings. This is my special day, and I am absolutely not canceling it just because you fumbled your career." The silence that followed was deafening. Arthur didn't yell. He didn't need to. He just reached over, picked up the folder, and looked at his daughter. "Pack your bags, Victoria," Arthur said quietly. "You're coming home with me." "Wait, what?" Carter panicked, suddenly realizing he had pushed too far. "Victoria, come on. I'm just stressed. We can figure this out." Victoria looked at him like she was seeing a stranger. The love in her eyes was completely replaced by cold, hard clarity. "Get out of my house, Carter. You have 1 hour to pack your things and leave. If you are not gone, my father will call the police." She turned and walked out of the room. Arthur followed her. Just like that, the $130,000 wedding was dead. The empire was burned to the ground. This is the moment that changes everything, the moment I finally took back control of my life. Thank you so much for your patience and for staying with me until now. You've been amazing. Please give this video a like and comment one below to let me know you've made it this far. Not only does this help more people find this story, but it also lets me know that my experiences truly mean something to someone. Your support is my greatest motivation to keep sharing the rest of this journey. Carter was thrown out onto the street with nothing but 2 designer suitcases and the clothes on his back. Victoria didn't just kick him out. She hired a security guard to stand at the end of her driveway to make sure he never set foot on the property again. She changed all the locks. She canceled all the credit cards he had been using. She cut off the oxygen to his lavish lifestyle instantly and permanently. But the nightmare for Carter, and by extension my parents, was only just beginning. Because Victoria was the primary name on the house and the accounts, she shielded herself as best she could. However, Carter, in his infinite arrogance, had signed his own name as the primary guarantor on several massive vendor contracts to prove he was the man of the house when dealing with the planners. 2 weeks after the breakup, the hammer fell. Arthur was a ruthless businessman. He wasn't about to absorb the financial hit for my brother's delusions. Arthur hired a top-tier corporate lawyer and filed a massive civil lawsuit against Carter. They sued him for $78,000, the exact amount of the non-refundable deposits that were lost because Carter refused to mutually agree to postpone the wedding and forced a hard cancellation. When the process server handed Carter the thick stack of legal papers, he was sitting in his childhood bedroom at my parents' house, eating cereal. He had no job. He had no savings. He had absolutely zero assets to his name. The government bond Grandpa Thomas left him was long gone. My parents, who had enabled his behavior for 30 years, were suddenly staring down the barrel of a $78,000 lawsuit. My father tried to call Arthur to smooth things over man-to-man. Arthur's lawyer answered the phone and informed my father that any further contact outside of legal channels would be treated as harassment. Panic set in. My parents were retired. They lived comfortably, but their savings were meant for their golden years, not to pay off a massive legal debt for a canceled luxury wedding. They tried to tell Carter to find a job to pay it off, but what job could he possibly get? His resume was completely blank. He had zero marketable skills. He went into interviews expecting a corner office and a 6-figure salary, only to be laughed out of the building when he couldn't explain what he had been doing for the last decade. The weight of the consequences was finally crushing them. And that's when they remembered the son they had thrown away. My phone started ringing on a Thursday morning. I was sitting in my brand new corner office, looking over the blueprints for a massive commercial warehouse project my firm had just won. The caller ID flashed my mother's name. I watched it ring, took a sip of my coffee, and let it go straight to voicemail. 10 minutes later, my dad called. Again, I let it ring out. I listened to his voicemail later. His voice was shaky, devoid of the arrogant authority he had used when he ordered me to change my wedding date. Elijah, son, we are in a really bad spot. Carter has some legal trouble, and we need your financial expertise. Please call me back. We're family. Family. The word actually made me laugh out loud. An hour later, the phone rang again. This time it was Carter. I decided to pick up. I wanted to hear it. I needed to hear the sound of his reality shattering. Hello, I said, keeping my voice perfectly flat. Eli. Oh, thank God you answered. Carter breathed heavily into the phone. He sounded frantic, utterly terrified. Listen, man, I really messed up. Victoria kicked me out. Her insane father is suing me for almost 80 grand. I don't have it, Eli. Mom and Dad are talking about taking a second mortgage on the house. You have to help me. Why would I do that, Carter? I asked calmly. Because I'm your brother, he pleaded, his voice cracking. I know I was a jerk about the wedding. I know I messed up with Dylan. But I'm desperate, man. You have the business. You got Grandpa's house. You have all that money. You could write a check and make this whole nightmare go away. Please, I'm begging you. I leaned back in my leather chair and looked out the window at the city skyline. I thought about the empty pews at my wedding. I thought about Grace crying over crossed-out names on our guest list. I thought about my father telling me my future didn't matter. Carter, listen to me very carefully, I said, my voice dropping to a low, icy register. You made a career out of using people. You used my parents. You used Victoria. You tried to use my best friend to ruin my wedding. You thought you could float through life on someone else's dime and never have to pay the bill. Eli, please. The bill is due, Carter, I interrupted smoothly. You wanted to play the big shot? You wanted to sign the luxury contracts? Then you figure out how to pay them. Get a job sweeping floors. Get a job flipping burgers. I don't care. But you will not see a single solitary cent from me. Not today. Not tomorrow. Not ever. You can't do this to me, he screamed, dropping the apologetic act, his true, entitled rage flaring up. You're my brother. You owe me. I owe you absolutely nothing, I replied quietly. Welcome to consequences, Carter. I hear they are highly educational. I hung up the phone. I opened my contacts, found his number, and blocked it. I did the same for my mother and my father. The purge was finally complete. 10 months later, the dust had completely settled, and my life was unrecognizable from the man who stood alone at that church altar. My consulting business had exploded beyond my wildest expectations. We cleared $425,000 in pure profit that year. I had a team of 20 loyal employees. I treated them well, paid them above industry standards, and in return they built my company into a powerhouse. Grace and I used a portion of the profits to buy a beautiful, secluded vacation property in Costa Rica. We spent 2 weeks there, walking on the beach, drinking fresh coffee, and finally getting the honeymoon we had denied ourselves while saving for our wedding. And the absolute best news of all came on a rainy Tuesday morning when Grace walked out of our bathroom, tears streaming down her smiling face, holding a positive pregnancy test. We were having a baby, a little boy. I held her in my arms and swore to the universe that my son would never, ever feel second best in his own home. He would know the value of hard work, and he would know absolute unconditional love. My past tried to reach out one last time. I got a text message from an unknown number. It was Dylan. Hey Eli, it's Dylan. I know I messed up bad. The contract with Victoria's company fell through after she got fired. I made a massive mistake trusting Carter. I miss you, man. Can we grab a beer and talk? I stared at the message. 2 years ago, I would have rushed to forgive him. I would have made excuses for him. But now, I felt nothing. He made his choice when he abandoned me 2 days before my wedding for a payout that didn't even exist. I didn't reply. I just deleted the message and went back to cooking dinner for my pregnant wife. Some bridges are burned, and the ashes are best left blowing in the wind. While I was building a legacy, Carter was experiencing the brutal, unforgiving reality of the real world. I still got my monthly coffee updates from my cousin Chloe, who watched the tragedy unfold from the sidelines. Arthur's lawyers had destroyed Carter in court. My parents, desperate to keep their golden boy out of jail for fraud, drained a massive chunk of their retirement savings to settle the lawsuit for $40,000. They were now living on an incredibly tight fixed budget. The country club memberships were canceled. The fancy dinners stopped. They were trapped in a financial prison of their own making. Carter's life was completely unrecognizable. Because he had a massive judgment against him and a ruined credit score, he couldn't rent a decent apartment. He was forced to move into a tiny, run-down studio in a terrible part of town. The Range Rover was repossessed months ago. He now drove a rusted, 15-year-old sedan that squealed every time he hit the brakes. His Instagram, once a shrine to wealth and excess, was a ghost town. All the photos of yachts and designer clothes were buried under a wave of vague, depressing quotes about fake friends and people leaving when times get tough. His influencer buddies had abandoned him the second the free drinks stopped flowing. He was 31 years old, working an entry-level retail job at a strip mall, folding cheap t-shirts for $13 an hour. His good looks were fading under the stress of actual labor and massive debt. He was miserable, he was lonely, and he was finally exactly where he deserved to be. The universe has an incredible sense of poetry. Last month, Grace and I were invited to a massive, highly exclusive wedding downtown. The groom, Matthew, was a major real estate developer and one of my firm's biggest clients. It was a black tie event at the most expensive venue in the city. I wore a custom tuxedo. Grace looked absolutely radiant in a dark blue maternity gown that highlighted her growing belly. We were sitting at our reserved table near the front, laughing with some other executives, enjoying the live jazz band. I turned around to signal a waiter for another glass of sparkling water for Grace. A man in a stiff, poorly fitted black uniform walked up to our table, carrying a silver tray of crab cake appetizers. His head was down. He looked exhausted. "Appetizers, sir?" the waiter mumbled. He looked up. It was Carter. He was holding a tray of food at a wedding he could never afford to attend, serving the brother he had tried to destroy. The color completely drained from his face. His hands started shaking so violently that the small plates rattled against the silver tray. He looked at my custom tuxedo. He looked at Grace's glowing face and her diamond ring. He looked at the elite company we were keeping. For a split second, I saw everything in his eyes. I saw the crushing humiliation. I saw the profound regret. I saw the agonizing realization that he had traded a brother who loved him for a lifestyle he couldn't keep. I didn't gloat. I didn't smirk. I didn't say a single word to him. I just looked at him with absolute, blank indifference. "No, thank you," I said calmly. "We're fine." Carter swallowed hard, his eyes dropping to the floor. He turned around and quickly walked back toward the kitchen. His shoulders slumped in defeat. I turned back to my wife, grabbed her hand, and kissed her knuckles. I felt a profound sense of peace wash over my entire soul. The war was over. I had won. Not by destroying him, but by outgrowing him. Looking back on everything that happened, I don't harbor any burning anger anymore. The rage that consumed me on my wedding day has completely evaporated. People always talk about revenge like it has to be some loud, explosive confrontation. They think you need to scream in someone's face or key their car to find satisfaction. But I learned a very different lesson. Sometimes the most brutal, devastating revenge you can ever inflict on toxic people is simply walking away and letting them destroy themselves. I didn't ruin Carter's life. His own greed did that. I just made sure the right people saw the truth. My parents made their choice. They gambled their family on the illusion of wealth, and they lost everything that actually mattered. I sit in my home office now, looking out at the trees in the backyard. Grace is in the nursery down the hall, painting the walls a soft, warm yellow. In a few months, I am going to hold my son for the first time. I am going to look into his eyes, and I am going to build a real family. A family built on respect, hard work, and loyalty that doesn't depend on a bank account. I am Elijah. I am a builder, and the life I've built is absolutely beautiful. Thank you for sticking around and listening to my story. I know it was a long one, but sharing it here feels like closing a heavy chapter. I hope this resonated with you in some way. Family dynamics can be incredibly complicated, and sometimes the hardest thing to do is walk away from the people who share your blood. Have you ever found yourself in a similar situation? Have you ever had to cut ties with family to protect your own peace? I would love to hear your experiences down in the comments. And finally, to my special group of listeners. If you have been with me since the very first minute, and you are hearing my voice right now, you are part of an exclusive group. Let's call it the 1% Club. If you made it to the absolute end, drop the letter W in the comments. W stands for winner. That's my secret signal to recognize the amazing people who truly stick around and support these stories. I see you, and I appreciate you more than you know. Please don't forget to hit that like button and follow the channel so we can stay connected. Take care of yourselves, protect your peace, and I will see you in the next story.